Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story Ghost in the Forest. The Horror Secret of the Old House is a book about a young woman who clears out her dead grandmother's home in rural North Carolina. She finds long-hidden secrets about a strange colony of beings in the forest. When Mouse's father asks her to clean out her dead grandmother's house, she agrees. After all, how bad can it be? The answer: pretty bad. She was a hoarder, and her house was filled with useless junk. That's terrifying enough, but there's more to it than that. Mouse stumbles upon her uncle's diary, which at first seems to be filled with meaningless grumbling until Mouse encounters some of the terrifying things he describes himself. Alone in the woods with her dog, Mouse finds herself facing a series of impossible horrors because sometimes the things that go bump in the night are real and they're looking for you. And if she doesn't face them head-on, she might not survive to tell the story. 16. Foxy was waiting for me at her house. She handed me another Tupperware container full of sandwiches. "You'll want these, I imagine. And have some food." "This is insane, isn't it?" I said. "Oh, you're completely out of your head," said Foxy agreeably, heating up meatloaf in my grandmother's ancient microwave. She pushed it toward me. Tomas came in. I wasn't sure how much he knew, but he looked at me and said, "It's a bad idea," so I figured he knew enough. "I know," I said, "but I have to." Saying it out loud made it sound even more fragile. Did I? Why? Because somebody had drawn Corroy on a scrap of paper. Somebody sent me a note asking for help. Tomas nodded. He went into the back of the house, and I heard a door open and close. I was dragging the last forkful of meatloaf through the gravy when he returned. He was wearing a battered leather jacket and hiking boots. "I'm coming with you," he said. I stared at him, blinking stupidly. "What?" "Look, my mama would beat me senseless if I let you and Foxy go off without me." "Don't be stupid," said Foxy sharply. "You gotta stay here and take care of the place. We can't both go." "I'm half your age," said Tomas. "So you got more to live for." "You're both nuts," I said, rising out of my chair. "You can't come with me, I'm going to get killed." "Better to do it in company, then," said Foxy. "I ain't scared." "Tomas, you're staying here, and that's final." She folded her arms. "It's your name on the deed. And the power bill." This was not a line of argument I expected her to take. We both stared at Foxy. "So," said Tomas. "So you ain't got a will, so if'n you die, they're gonna take the whole place and throw Skip out on his ear. And shut off the power. So you got alive, and maybe that'll teach you not to die intestate like a damn fool." Tomas' mouth opened and closed. He looked at me, but there was absolutely nothing I could say to this, and also I was still dealing with the fact that Foxy was coming with me. "But, Foxy, don't argue. I got a will all made out. And notarized." I looked at her. She was wearing ripped jeans over black fishnets and the sort of spiked boots that you'd wear to a punk show. Her lipstick was a particularly savage shade of pink. She was perhaps the most unlikely bodyguard I could imagine, but the alternative was going alone with my dog. "Notarize," I said weakly. "Yeah, and I had to pay $5 to have that done, so I don't want to hear any more about it." I finished my meatloaf in defeat. I tried one more time before we left, standing in the doorway. "Are you sure? I mean, this is way past being neighborly." "Ain't paid you for the moose head or the microwave," said Foxy. "And if we all come back, I ain't going to." I just looked at her. Astonishingly, a little bit of a flush started to creep up her sharp old face. "Look," she growled, "you're doing a dumb thing for a good reason, and maybe I'm not that different from Tomas. If I let you go off in the woods and get ate by holler people, or whatever it is they do, I wouldn't be able to look myself in the mirror anymore." She rallied a bit. "And I gotta look in the mirror. Makeup this good doesn't happen blind." "Thanks," I said. She snorted. "Don't thank me too hard. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit curious about what's on the other side of those stones. Yeah, well, I held the door open for her. I was pretty scared. She went out past me, hefting her backpack strap over her shoulder. Oh, don't worry. You still ought to be. There were still a few hours of light left as we set off into the woods. Bongo bounced around on the end of his leash in enormous good spirits. I hoped this was a good sign. If he had been terribly traumatized by visiting the place where someone had put a note in his collar, he didn't show any sign of it. Probably should start out in the morning, said Foxy, but I ain't looking forward to another night waiting for monsters to come in the windows. You and me both. Leaves crunched underfoot as we walked. The house vanished behind us. I don't know where we're going, I confessed. I figured we'd start at the stones. I think sort of this way-ish, but Bongo led the way the first time. Think he can find it again. We both looked at Bongo. He was peeing meditatively against a tree stump. I don't think there's any way to ask him, I confessed. He's a kind of an idiot. Foxy grinned. Well, I got there by shooting a deer, and deer are about the dumbest animals in creation, so maybe we'll get lucky. In retrospect, if we'd been really lucky, we probably would have wandered around in circles for a bit and then gone home for more meatloaf. I still probably wouldn't sleep well at night, but I'd have managed. I could have convinced myself it was all an elaborate hoax and some weird neighbor had dressed up in a deer outfit to scare the crap out of me. But we weren't lucky like that. Bongo picked up a smell that was probably a vole under the leaves and dragged me after it, huffing on the end of his leash. When he reached the invisible spot he was after, he scuffed at the ground for a minute. Then, disappointed, he straightened up. I watched his nostrils working. His ears were lifted, alert, and then he struck out south and east. He wasn't quite running, but moving with the concentration of a dog on a mission. It doesn't mean anything, I muttered, to myself or to Foxy or both. He does this for squirrels too. It wasn't a squirrel. It was something else. He began to move faster and faster into a ground-eating lope, tail up like a flag. I glanced beside me. Foxy was keeping up despite the heels on her boots. Don't mind me, she panted. There's a lot of holes. Hon, I've been living in these woods my whole life. You just watch your own feet. Yes, Foxy. We veered more south than I remembered. I was starting to wonder if maybe we were chasing a squirrel after all, when there was the dry streambed. Despite the recent rains, the leaves were dry and crackling instead of slimy. Small blessings, I suppose. In what seemed like no time at all, we reached the wicker-like tunnel. It was still dry and dead-looking, and the afternoon shadows were starting to lengthen under it. I ducked down into it while Bongo sniffed along the leaves. Phew, said Foxy. Not the way I came last time. Or maybe it was, and stuff grew up around it. We went forward. Pretty soon we were almost jogging along. There was a sense of urgency that I can't explain. Part of it was the desire to get to the stones before the sun went down, but there was something else too. As if a door was closing, and we had to reach it before it shut. No, not like that. As if a door was opening, and we had to be out of the room before whatever was on the other side came through. Foxy hooked her hand under the strap of my backpack. I glanced back, surprised. I ain't slowing down, she said, although she was breathing hard. But feeling weird. Your heart, I said, panicky. Are you? No, not my heart, don't make me slap you upside the head, my heart's fine, she rolled her eyes. I mean, it feels like you're going on ahead of me and it's getting harder to follow. I'm thinking something doesn't want me along. She tightened her grip on my pack. Ain't gonna give it the satisfaction. I nodded. Bongo was hauling on his leash now, whining at our slowness. The tunnel tilted upward. I had to hunch over, feeling Fox's knuckles still hard against my shoulder blade. We had to hurry. The door was opening, and if we went quick, there was a single hollow talk on the other side of the wicker, and my heart lurched. If it had stopped there, I could have convinced myself it was a woodpecker. Maybe. But it didn't stop there. The noise came again and again, louder, until it was directly beside me. If the wall had not been in the way, I could have reached out and touched it. Tock, tock, tock. The sounds of stones in a hollow chest of bones. Bongo began to run. It was there. Tock, tock, tock. I could hear the stones rattling and the sound of its feet hitting the ground, and a strange scraping noise, like scissors opening and closing. Is that what it sounds like when bones run? All that stood between us and the effigy were thin dead branches and dry vines woven between them. I could see flashes of light and shadow through the gaps, and I thought inanely, I knew it could go out in the day. I knew it. It could have been there all this time, watching me. Bongo heaved forward against the leash, and I ran after him, trying to remember if there were gaps in the tunnel, if there was a place where the effigy could come through. Please no, God no. I remember very little of that flight up the hillside. I don't know how long it took. It must have been much lighter than I remember it being, because it was only late afternoon, but in my memory it is a dark, closing tunnel. I could not see my feet. Occasionally I would catch a flash of brightness from the metal rings on Bongo's collar. I ran blind, and Foxy ran behind me, and outside the tunnel, the effigy kept pace. Was it on the left, the right? I didn't want to look, because if I looked, maybe I'd see it, and if I saw it, I was afraid I'd fall down and curl into a ball until it ate me. Tock, tock, tock. Oh God, was there more than one? It seemed to come from both sides. Oh God, let that be echoes, let it not be two of them. I can't handle two of them. I can't even handle one of them. Oh God. Something struck the wicker tunnel. The precarious root and vine frame bowed sideways, and fragments of bark and dried leaf rained down on us. The walls shook wildly as whatever it was shut up, you know what it is, slammed against the side, and the tock, tock, tock was no longer a woodpecker knock but a staccato-like gunfire. Foxy never faltered. I must have paused, because she shouted in my ear, keep moving, and I lunged forward, while Bongo heaved upward at the end of the leash. Foxy was in better shape than I was, for all that she was close to twice my age. When my backpack began to slide down, she wedged it back up on my shoulder, and pretty soon she was pushing me forward and Bongo was pulling, and the effigy rattled the hackstones in its ribs, and I dragged air into my chest that stabbed like knives, and not suddenly at all, not anywhere close to suddenly. An eternity later, we fell out of the wicker tunnel and into the field of twisted stones. 17. I couldn't have leapt to my feet if my life depended on it. Foxy was crouched over me, and Bongo was trying to stand over me protectively and also to hide underneath me in terror. When a minute or two had passed and my heart was slowing and I still wasn't dead, I whispered, "Is it gone?" "Think so," said Foxy. "If there was ever anything there, which I ain't entirely sure of." I looked up at her silently. She snorted and looked back down the tunnel. "Fine, okay," she said. "Yeah, it's gone." I breathed for a few minutes. The sky was grey. Bare trees hung on the hills like curtains in a dark room. Bongo hunched down and fit himself under my knees as best he could. I kept thinking it was a woodpecker before I said finally, "Can see why." I didn't say, "Do you think there were two of them?" because I didn't think I could handle it if she said yes. "Do you think it was trying to keep us from getting here?" I asked instead. "Something was," said Foxy. She held out her left hand. There was a raw red stripe across her fingers and palm, as if something had taken the top layer of skin off. Blood beaded at the edges. "Foxy, it's fine," she said. "I mean, it hurts like the devil, but it's not deep. It was where I had your backpack. Toward the end there, it felt like a handful of nettles." I grabbed my backpack strap as if expecting it to be made of sandpaper, but it just felt like normal nylon. "Expect it was meant for me, not you," said Foxy matter-of-factly. "I felt it before, too. I'm not supposed to come along. Why would it want that? Who knows what the holler people want?" She grinned sourly. "Maybe they figure my ratty old bones won't look good on their mantelpiece. And mine will. Hey, maybe you got cute bones." I started laughing, half high on adrenaline, and stood up. Bongo, reassured that everything was all right again, licked the back of my hand. I dug my fingers in behind his ears as I looked around the hillside. The sky was the same shade of grey as before. If sunset was coming on, there was no sign of it. It was grey, grey, grey. A wicked Vorish dome. Under the sky, the hills. Same as before. And the trees that hung like curtains on the hillsides were still bare. I wondered if they ever leafed out at all. Were there even seasons in this place? Shit, said Foxy, looking around. And then, more quietly, shit. Eloquent, I said. Is it like you remember? Yeah, pretty much. Only she waved her hand more. I nodded. It had been only, 10 days, 11, but my memory had whittled down some of the edges of the place. It wasn't that I didn't remember it. It was just that the reality was indeed more. The tree slithering out from under the stones was more like a snake. The leering carvings were stranger and sharper, and the animals twisted themselves more grotesquely in pain or in ecstasy, as if my mind hadn't quite been able to hold everything. No, wait, the girl in the green book had described the trees like snakes. Maybe that had gotten into my head somehow too. Which way, said Foxy. I have no idea. I hefted my backpack. I still don't even know if Bongo was here when he got the note. We might be in completely the wrong place. Never stopped me before, said Foxy. The white stone's this way, I said. The white stone, yes, the white stone, the tall one, the one that's carved with something that you need to see again. My voice sounded totally normal, and the fact that I suddenly had a weird itchy desire to see the white stone again didn't seem to impact it. I could touch it. I could figure out the carvings this time. Would it be warm or cold, smooth or rough? In my dream, it had been cold and I tried to warm it. Good a place to start as any. Of course she couldn't know that I wanted to see it. I shouldn't tell her. It would make me sound weird or controlled by holler people, when the fact was that. The fact was that. Oh, it doesn't matter. Stop worrying and start walking. Past the carvings, the scowling ones and the ones like animals and the ones that lay down like dead things. And I twisted myself around like, shut up. Just shut up. Get to the white stone. Ugly little bastards, muttered Foxy, eyeing the scowling stones. Don't try to imitate them, I said. They don't like that. Or they like it a lot. I don't know which. Foxy gave me a sharp look. You okay? Yeah, sorry, it's this place. I rubbed my forehead. Brain fog. But the stones, yeah. I tried to make a face like one the last time, and I shouldn't have. I was almost able to. I thought I was going to dislocate my jaw. Foxy raised her eyebrows. Huh. Yeah, I sort of forgot about that. I tried not to make eye contact with the grinning faces in the rocks. It seemed so crazy, and it's all crazy, and I was afraid I was going crazy, so I figured it was just my mind playing tricks and maybe I had a muscle spasm or something. But now I think it was probably real. Probably. Foxy shook her head. These things, if Skip was here, he could tell us what kind of carving it is. He went to some fancy art school out west, and every now and again he'll come out with that postmodern pre-Raphaelitism or something like that. I dunno if they covered things like this in art history class. The stones that lay down like the dead ones were curled in the grass in front of us. I guess we could take a photo for him. Foxy snorted. I didn't bring a camera. Kinda doubt things would come out real well even if I had. I remembered the way that my one photo had come out overexposed, looking like a bad Photoshop of somebody's fingerprint. Probably. Bongo gave the dead ones a wide berth. He didn't seem frightened of them, but he definitely didn't want to get too near them, as if they were a hole in the ground he was afraid to fall into. Maybe they are a hole in the world, and if you look too long you'll fall through. The lines seemed to swim in front of me as if they were breathing. I felt dizzy and hot. It's just like being seasick. The horizon's wrong. Go find the white stone, use it as an anchor, and everything will settle down again. The white stones past these, I said, careful to keep my eagerness out of my voice. My hands appeared to be shaking. That was very odd. It wouldn't do to let Foxy see that. She'd get the wrong idea. I shoved them in my jacket pockets as well as I could while holding Bongo's leash. Something jabbed me in the knuckles. My head seemed to clear abruptly. Wait, what? Foxy. This is odd. I want to see that white stone again. She looked over at me, faintly puzzled. We're going there, ain't we? No, I mean I suddenly really wanted to and I didn't want to tell you about it, and I think that's weird and suspicious. Her gaze sharpened. Now, that's interesting. Good on you for fighting it. I don't think I was fighting it, I admitted. I dug around in my jacket pocket for what had jabbed me and pulled out a twig. I poked myself with this. Is that hickory? Yeah. From outside the coffee shop. Foxy nodded. Hickory'll help. I'm wearing, like, a pound of it myself. You still got that rosary? In my backpack. Well, put it on, then you think evil's gonna sit around and wait while you get dressed. Chastened, I pulled out the string of hickory beads and dropped it over my head. The air seemed to lighten. The twisted carvings still moved when I looked at them, but they moved less, more like a bad moire pattern than like breathing. I thought of the white stone carefully, as if I were probing a sore spot with my tongue. Big white rock. Some weird stuff going on with that rock. How we feeling about that rock? I had no particular opinion about the rock other than that it was another creepy thing on the pile of increasingly creepy things. I was pretty sure that it was another rock like the one in the Green Book, and thus there was a slim chance it might try to get me pregnant, and that I was a bit miffed at it for apparently trying to get into my head. I reported this to Foxy. Complicated old world, isn't it, she said. She had picked up a stick somewhere and was poking the dead twisted one with it. Are you sure you should be doing that? Look, if it's gonna come to life and take a chunk out of me, I'd rather it did now than when my back was turned. There was a certain logic to this position. The dead twisted one did not take a chunk out of her despite several solid pokes with the stick. I think Foxy might have been slightly disappointed. On the far side of the dead ones was a little space, and then more carvings. I remembered walking through them for a long way, but I wasn't sure how long it had been. I hadn't exactly been in my right mind had I'd been singing "Oh, Susanna," and it had gotten a bit strange after that. This is farther than I got, said Foxy. I guess we just keep walking, then. So we walked through more carvings, some of them very large indeed, and anchored down in the ground somehow. I didn't remember those. Had it been some enchantment, some wicked vow, that the hickory was keeping away? And then I saw the white stone. It gleamed in the dim light like a tooth. There was the grassy bowl around it and the ferns around the base and the carvings of something. We stopped at the top of the bowl. The stones around the rim leaned inward, toward the stone, and I wondered vaguely if it was acting on their brains the way it had acted on mine. Settle down. They're rocks. They don't have brains. Although up here in this place, who the hell knows, maybe they do. In the Green Book, isn't there a bit where the narrator wonders if her family all got turned to stones? Maybe these are all the people who got stuck up here, the moonshiners and the frat boys and whatnot. I squeezed the hickory twig tightly between my fingers, but the thoughts didn't go away. Apparently that was just me being paranoid, not any kind of magic. "How," said Foxy, looking at the stone. "Do you feel like you want to go touch it?" I asked hesitantly. I wanted to, the first time I saw it. "I do," she said slowly, "but I ain't going to. I can feel the wanting to, though. It's like a pretty boy you know is more trouble than he's worth." She folded her arms and glared at the stone, and I pitied any pretty boy who had caused her trouble in the past. "This is the second time I'm seeing it," I said. "I think I'm supposed to be pregnant now. Well, get you a test when we get back home, hey? It'd have to get past the IUD first." Weird and creepy as the white stone was, I had a hard time imagining it was a match for that. What about you? Hon, if I get knocked up, it won't be magic, it will be a goddamn miracle. She craned her neck, looking around the stone. What's on the other side? I shook my head. This is as far as I got. I saw the stone and things got a little weird. I glanced down at Bongo. He was watching the stone intently, the way he watched cars out the window sometimes. Was it going to go past the house, or was it the UPS guy and thus his mortal enemy? It was so quiet here. There was no wind to ripple the grass of the bald or move clouds in the heavy grey sky. I couldn't hear any insects calling, or frogs, or birds. No woodpeckers. Let's go around, Foxy said finally. We skirted the rim of the grass bowl. Bongo continued to watch the stone, his whole body taut, his ears straining forward. On the far side, we looked back at the white stone and Foxy gave a single bray of laughter. Bongo yanked on the leash, startled, and then gave her a reproachful glance. Sorry, buddy, she said to him. Well, that's a hell of a thing, isn't it? I stared at Ambrose's white stone and almost wanted to laugh myself. From this side, it was obvious. It was two beings, and they were, not to put too fine a point upon it, screaming like rabbits. Well, it wasn't like it was a surprise. Ambrose's white stone was clearly kin to this one. I just hadn't been expecting it to be quite so vivid. They were carved in much the same style as the rest of the stones, deeply scored lines that moved too much when you saw them from the corner of your eye. The top one had great curving horns, like a ram, and he was pulling back the head of his partner by her own horns, which were long and twisting like an antelope's. Her throat seemed very thick, like a beast's neck, and her face protruded into a muzzle like a beast, but her body was mostly human, if oddly proportioned. Speaking of proportions, well, he had nothing to worry about in that department. That one I'd put in the front yard, said Foxy cheerfully. Just to see the mainman's face. Heh, I said weakly. The longer I looked, the less funny it got. Which is odd, because frankly, sex is hilarious. But the carvings were so detailed and the Moapatan movement made the bodies undulate and seem to thrust together, and I was starting to get dizzy looking at it, and I remembered the dream where I pressed myself against the white stone. Was the female beast enjoying it? Her mouth was open in what could have been passion or agony. My head ached. I could feel a pulse beating in my right eye and in my temples and between my legs. Dear God, was I getting turned on by the carving? I gotta sit down, I said. Not right here, suggested Foxy, taking my arm. She steered me away from the stone. Once I was no longer looking at it, it got easier. My pulse stopped beating in my ears or anywhere else. What the hell is that thing? I asked after a few minutes of sitting on the grass with my back to the carving. I know it's stupid, but I felt like. And then I blushed. Which was nuts. The entire situation was completely batshit loony, and here I was blushing because among the batshit loony things was a statue with a big honking dick on it. It's okay, hon. If I was a few years younger, well. She shook her head. I'm old enough to know better, but it's still got a wallop, doesn't it? A wallop. Yes. That was as good a description as any. Bongo sat down and scratched behind his ear. Apparently it didn't work on dogs or on males, or at least on males whose testicles were a distant vet-related memory. I guess old Ambrose was onto something after all, I said. If he's expecting us to get preggers from looking at it, he's still gonna be pretty disappointed. Had those bits out years ago. Not that they were doing me a hell of a lot of good anyway, but it'd be a bitch to get cancer in a bit I ain't using. I hear you, I said absently, petting Bongo. I don't know. Do you think the girl, whoever she was, actually got pregnant looking at a statue? Oh, who the hell knows? For all I know, it just got her thinking about it, and she went and found some nice young fella to get her in the family way. From the way your granddaddy talked about Ambrose, he'd have found that a lot more shocking than looking at a statue. Foxy snorted. Certain sort of man would probably prefer it if sex was all looking at statues and no actual poking. It is very likely that she did, said a voice behind us. And bore a child of it, or more than one. Foxy and I both jerked upright. Bongo, valiant guard dog that he was, looked up and wagged his tail. There was a woman standing there. She was very tall and very pale. Even her eyes were pale. Her irises were flecked with red, and her pupils were the faded grey colour of the sky. I have borne 7, she said. 5 drew no breaths. Of the other 2, but we will speak of that later. Where had she come from? Why hadn't we heard her? Hoy, said Foxy, her chin jutting out. My name is Anna, said the woman. She pronounced it with a long first syllable, Anna. I am one of the people of this place. I saw motion out of the corner of my eye. It was the same twisting moire pattern as the stones, but when I turned my head, there was a man standing there. He was as tall as she was, and I suppose he was handsome, but there was something odd about his skin. He did not speak, but took his place beside the woman. He was even paler than she was. Both of them had hair that was not so much white as completely colourless, like mist. Anna folded her hands together. You will come with me now, she said. It was not a request but a statement of fact. Foxy tried to push back nevertheless. What if we don't? The pale woman shook her head. And then I heard it. The click of bones. The hollow rattle of stones knocking together. Tock, tock, tock. Bongo's wagging stopped, and a whine started up in his throat. Shapes began to appear out of the gloom behind her, coming from behind the stones or from inside the earth itself. The air twisted and untwisted until my eyes watered, but I could still see them all too well. Effigies. Dozens of them. Not on the other side of a window. Not with walls between us. Right here. Right now. Tock, tock, tock. I sucked in my breath, and honestly did not know if I would ever draw another one. You have no choice, the woman said, as monsters of stone and bone surrounded her. You have trespassed into deep places, and the only way out is deeper still. 18. I think that Bongo is the only reason I didn't have a nervous breakdown on the spot. There are stories of people enduring horrors, escaping war zones, walking for hundreds of miles barefoot, that sort of thing, because they are being strong for their children. I am not saying it's the same thing at all. Bongo, as I'd said before, is not my child, he's my dog. Nevertheless, at that moment he needed me. He was making that horrible fear growl, his back was humped up, and his tail was between his legs. I dropped down next to him and put my arms around him to keep him from lunging at an effigy and getting probably killed. He was peeing in terror, which meant he peed on my knee, but you know, I was feeling a little loose-bladdered myself. Foxy stood over me and gripped my shoulder. I could hear her breathing, harsh and quick, behind me. Well, leave, I said. I'm sorry we bothered you. Well, go away and not come back. You will come with me now, repeated Anna, ignoring me. My dog can't, I said. I didn't look at the effigies. If I didn't look at the monsters, they couldn't be real, but there were so many and they were moving and I kept seeing bits of them, even as I tried not to look. Hooves and horns and rocks and branches like antlers and old rags stretched over frames that weren't remotely human. Don't look, if you don't look they can't see you. Then you will be killed, said the man, speaking for the first time. His voice was thinner than I expected and had a quaver in it, like a very old man's. I'm not refusing, I said. Fox's fingers tightened on my shoulder. This is not me refusing. Well, go with you. But my dog's scared. I'll carry him. I was speaking very calmly and rationally. I remember that. If I could just keep everyone talking, they wouldn't let the things I wasn't looking at get my dog. I said I'll carry him as if it were that easy. Bongo weighs 60-odd pounds. I'm not strong enough to carry something that size very far, but I didn't know what else to say. Anna stepped forward until she was only a few feet from Bongo and me. I looked up at her, and she was impossibly tall. I know I was kneeling on the ground, but before I thought she was 6'4", maybe a bit more. Now she looked 7 feet tall, 8, 10 taller than any human I'd ever seen. She did something with her left hand. The air around her fingers made another moire distortion pattern that drifted toward Bongo. No, I put out a hand to ward it off. It felt like the barest breath of air on my skin as it passed. My hand went through it. The tiny hairs on the back of my fingers stood on end, but that was all. He will take no harm of it, said Anna. It is a charm to calm beasts, that is all. She made the gesture again. This time it was faster. The distorted air shimmered around Bongo's face like a heat haze on the road. I felt his trembling ease against my chest. The growl died away into nothing. He gave a short, puzzled whine, as if he could not quite remember why he had been angry, and then he turned his head and licked my face. She had just done what magic was. That magic? Of course it was fucking magic. What are you, stupid? What did you think was happening? How did you think the effigy was walking around, if not magic? How are all of them walking around, if not magic? Well, yes. I did not much like the prospect of someone magicking my dog, but if it meant that nobody got killed and Bongo wasn't pissing himself in terror, that was what mattered. Right, hell, if I'd had sedatives, I'd have jammed them down his throat and probably taken one myself. I stood up. My own legs were shaking. Foxy's hand on my shoulder squeezed harder. We will go now, said Anna. Foxy. Looks like we don't have much choice, she said. Simon Hon. Anna swept her arm in a slow, dramatic gesture, pointing farther down the hill. She was wearing grey cloth wrapped around her, some kind of robe or sari or toga, something with a lot of folds. The cloth hung down from her arm when she gestured, making her look like some kind of classical statue. I focused very hard on her arm and not on the milling shapes just behind it. Sooner or later I was going to have to look at them, but if I did, I was going to become as frozen as poor Bongo had been. I had to not look. Everybody yells at Orpheus and Lot's wife. Put yourself in their shoes for 5 minutes and you'd yell a lot less, I promise you. I gathered up Bongo's leash. He walked next to me, tail and ears up, a dog on a walk that was a bit boring but which held the hope of being interesting. I could hear the effigies walking on the grass. Their feet clicked when they touched stone. My skin was going to crawl off my body soon. I locked my eyes on Anna. She began to walk in the direction she had pointed. Down slope into the gloomy twilight. I could see the bare trees in serrated ranks around us. I was starting to think that the trees would never leaf out, that their nature was just to be empty branches and twisting trunks. Perhaps they were parasitic. There's a fair number of parasitic plants. Beach drops. Dudder. Indian paintbrush. My aunt would have a field day. Was I thinking about plants so that I wouldn't think about monsters? You bet your ass I was. I don't know how long we walked. The slope got steeper. I divided my time between staring at my feet and staring at Anna's back. Her colourless hair seemed very bright in the darkness, like fog on a dark night. I didn't dare look around, but I knew Foxy was behind me. I could hear her breathing. I'm sorry I got you into this, Foxy, I said. Shit, Hon, I should have known better than to let either of us get into this. Stones loomed out of the dimness. 3 of them, arranged like a doorway. It looked like a scale-down Stonehenge. I did not want to go through those stones. Stupid thing to say, obviously. I didn't want to be anywhere near here. I didn't want to be following the horror people with their horrific pets crowding around behind me. But I really didn't want to go through the doorway. It exuded a kind of not menace, exactly. Remoteness. Like I was about to pass through an airlock into an alien planet. Maybe I could break away and run now if I tried, and probably the things would kill me, but if I went through those stones, I would be somewhere else and there was no getting back under my own power. Anna passed over the stone threshold. Nothing obvious happened. She didn't vanish or waver or turn strange colors. I turned my head and looked behind me. There were at least a dozen effigies close behind us. They formed a loose semicircle behind Foxy, moving restlessly back and forth. The dim light gleamed on pale bone and sparked on bits of rusted wire. The one nearest me was hunched up like a vulture, shorter than I was. Its head was a broad fan shape, made of twigs tied to was that a broken shovel blade. It turned its head. The twigs were bent and crooked, and the hollow places they framed gazed back at me like eyes. There were more than 2. There may have been more than 10. The rest of its body was draped in roadkill rags. I couldn't make out details, and I was glad I couldn't. Suddenly the deer effigy seemed almost tame by comparison. It was too dark now to see the rest clearly. That was fine. I had an impression of ragged bodies, limbs made of bone, and branches wrapped in wire and cord, some of them vaguely human or animal-shaped, some of them not remotely human at all. The twisted ones. The ones the rocks are supposed to resemble, or things made to resemble the rocks. I could hear them moving. Bone clicked and branches creaked and things sighed and sloughed and tapped. Something out there sounded incongruously like denim rubbing together between someone's thighs as they walked. SHHFFF SHHFFF SHHFFF. If I tried to run, they would be on me at once. Foxy. ICM2 Hon. I nodded. Sticks and stones, I thought. Sticks and stones may break my bones. I didn't bother with the second line. Who gave a damn about words now? With one hand on Bongo's collar and one wrapped around the hickory beads, I stepped through the doorway into the Vorish dome. Nothing dramatic happened when I stepped over the threshold. There wasn't a flash of light or a crack of thunder. It was just a little easier to see suddenly, as if it was not quite so dim. When I looked down, there was a path at my feet. The grass had been worn away to packed earth, yellow-orange clay with tiny pebbles embedded in it. That part was still like the landscape around the house anyway. The bare trees parted around the path. Unlike the wicker tunnel, they grew tall and straight, but it was still a long and winding way down. I took a quick glance behind me. Foxy was there. So was the tall, pale man. So were the effigies. The archway stood at the top of the path, as remote and unreachable as a star. Bongo's tail was up, wagging vaguely as he trotted after Anna. I envied him. White stones gleamed like fireflies in the dark, dotting the edge of the path. They were carved in patterns that at first seemed unfamiliar. Then I realized that they were the same as the twisted ones. The designs folded and doubled back on themselves, but they weren't doing the painful eye-burning jitter. I could look at them out of the corner of my eye, and they didn't look as if they were crawling away. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. Either something was happening with my eyes or maybe that more pattern is what happens when an enchantment meets the real world. Like heat haze on the road. Now you're not in the real world, so it isn't distorting the air around it anymore. Thanks, self. That was real helpful. A coping mechanism. If the white stones were enchanted, then there had been one sitting at the edge of my grandmother's garden for quite a while. Although for all I knew, that particular stone was a signpost of sorts, a warning to the other Holler people that my grandmother's presence was foul. I wondered how Cotgrave had figured that out in the first place. Ambrose, maybe. Or maybe had just stopped seeing the things after he met her. He hadn't written it down. I wished I knew. Maybe I'd have been able to repel the damn things now. Anna turned to follow a bend in the path. I saw her profile. It was impassive but not serene, a set face with secrets behind it. What had the Green Book said about the Lady Cassop? That she was the tallest and whitest of them all, which meant what? Exactly that the author was weirdly racist, that Cassop was closely related to the Holler people, close enough to summon snakes and do magic with wax dolls, not close enough to get out of being burned alive. I could believe that the woman in front of me could summon snakes. Frankly, snakes would have been an improvement. Snakes are generally more scared of humans than humans are of them. It would be nice to be around something that was more scared of me than I was of it. The effigies sure went. Anna turned again, following a set of switchbacks down the hillside. Something was moving among the trees. I could catch glimpses of things shifting, rags perhaps. Grasses. Not leaves, not in this leafless forest. A low, throbbing sound filled the air, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Easy, said Foxy behind. Ease it, Hon. That one's a mourning dove. Oh God, I said faintly. I felt embarrassed, which was probably stupid because being terrified out of my wits was absolutely the most logical thing I could be at the moment. Still, who knew they had morning doves in what fairyland hell? I followed Anna. I couldn't shake a sense that I knew her from somewhere, but I couldn't remember from where. Well, I don't really have context, do I? I mean, if you're used to seeing someone while surrounded by monsters, you don't recognize them when they're just getting a scone at the coffee shop, do you? I was pretty sure I did not know her from the coffee shop. The switchbacks continued down the hill. I began to see buildings through the bare trees below us. They were made of pale stone or clay, squared off, like something you'd see at Mesa Verde or in the desert around Mesopotamia. There were strange growths off the side of the buildings that at first looked like more trees. We were directly above one when I finally realized that it wasn't a tree but some kind of odd, lumpy construction of mud and branches. It looked wildly out of place against the square stone buildings. Some kind of nests, looks like, whispered Foxy. Once she said the word nest, it snapped into focus. They looked like swallow nests on the side of a building, only grown to enormous size. I wondered what would hatch inside that kind of nest and then decided immediately that I did not want to know. I would be infinitely happier not knowing. There was absolutely no good that could come of knowing a thing like that. People like Ambrose talk about forbidden knowledge. Nobody talks about knowledge that is just a dreadfully bad idea all around. The white man moved up to walk beside Anna. He passed close enough that I could see that his skin had thousands of fine lines in it. They didn't look like wrinkles, but like cracks, the way some porcelain glazes crackle and break. It occurred to me suddenly that he might be an effigy himself, a very old skin over what tree branches and wire bones, a human skeleton full of hagstones. Bongo twitched as my fingers jerked on his leash. He glanced up at me, as if wondering what my problem was. Sorry, I whispered to my dog. We reached the final switchback. The base of the path led to a square, lit with that grey, indirect light. From above, with no trees to block my view, I could look down into the heart of a cold city. It looked empty. The doors were black rectangles. There were no lights. There were only a few things scuttling between the buildings, and from the way they moved, I knew they were not even so human as Anna was. Maybe the other people are asleep, or they don't want to get close to us. Hell, for all I know, it's like the War of the Worlds, and they're afraid of catching some disease from us. I wondered briefly if I should worry about catching some terrible disease from Anna, then glumly decided that I was probably not going to live long enough to worry about whether I was up on my current vaccines. Anna herself strode forward, never slowing. Her entourage of clicking, sighing effigies bunched up around us until I knew that they were as close to me as Foxy was. I could have reached out and touched one if I were so inclined. I would rather have gnawed my hand off at the wrist. Look, I ordered myself, as we entered that quiet square. Look, the horror movie gets less scary once the monster comes out of the shadows. Just look at them. See what you're up against. I turned my head and saw the ones that flanked me. The fan-headed one I knew already. It hopped like a vulture when it walked. Some of the others, though, I forced myself to study them as if they were some of my Aunt Kate's samples, something safely under a microscope slide. Rag, bone, wire, stone, other things too, natural and unnatural. One had bullet casings tied in among its hagstones. One had the deep rib cage and narrow hips of a greyhound, the ribs stuffed with dead birds and old mouse nests. One was scaled in what looked like black leather until I realized that it was made of bits of blown-up tires. Sticks and stones may break my bones. Sticks and stones may break my bones. It ran through my head with the same maddening jump-up rhythm as the litany of the twisted ones, until the words had no meaning and it was just a rhyme pounding in my blood. There was an effigy that had dozens of thin mud pipes along its back. It took me a moment to realize that they were the nests of mud auger wasps, the little clay chimneys that get built every summer, all tied together like organ pipes. Two paced beside me on my right, humped and headless, as if someone had built a body and then decided they'd gone far enough. Empty sleeves of some material, cloth or hide, it was impossible to tell, hung down where the necks should be. Perhaps I stared for too long, because one of those dangling sleeves moved as if there was something inside, something turning to look back at me. I jerked my eyes away and fixed them on Bongo's back. "Where do you think they are taking us?" I whispered to Foxy. "Shit, Hon, does it matter? You will be taken to a holding place," said Anna, not looking back at us, "until your fate has been determined." "But where are we now?" I asked, looking over the effigies at the strange, empty city. I still had not seen another human, or even one as human-shaped as the Holler people. "Is this more of the hill with the rocks?" "No. The place of stones is a threshold place," said Anna. "One can reach your world and this one from there. Thresholds are powerful, but it is not safe." Safe? I sank my teeth into my lower lip. Anna shrugged. "The white stone. The stone attracts attention. The Vorish dome over this place keeps it unnoticed. There are things that one might speak with, perhaps even invoke, but one does not wish to live beside them day after day." The irony of this statement coming from a woman standing flanked by monstrous effigies built of bone and mud and wire was so great that I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep myself from yelling at her or shaking her or doing any one of a number of things that would undoubtedly get me horribly slaughtered in short order. "Your critters, they're based on them stones?" asked Foxy, speaking up for the first time. The man with the cracked skin turned his head and looked at her. His pupils dilated wrong. I'd have thought he was on drugs, except for the bit where I was in a cold city on the far side of impossible, and if anybody was on drugs I would probably ask them if they'd share. "They are modeled on many things," he said, "but those are shapes of power." Most of me was terrified. Almost all of me, in fact. But underneath, a tiny little voice was saying, "Isn't that fascinating? You're under the Vorish dome. You're somewhere that hardly anyone else has been. Even Cockgrave never got this far into the hills. Isn't that interesting?" I didn't know whether to embrace that voice or try to smother it. It was like standing on a cliff and hearing the little voice that tells you to jump. For all I know, once you jump off, that voice says, "Isn't this fascinating?" all the way down. Listen to the wind rushing by your ears. "Isn't that interesting? Look at how sharp the rocks are below you. Aren't you intrigued?" Foxy put her hand on my shoulder again. We all kept walking. I truly don't remember very much more about the walk through the city. I think it must have taken at least another 10 or 15 minutes, but it's mostly a blur. I stared at Bongo's ears. Out of the corner of my eye, I kept seeing dark openings into buildings. I wondered if there were other Holler people inside, watching us from the darkness. Once I looked up because we stepped into a shadow, and I saw the branches of one of the nests stretching over the street, connecting the two houses. Something came squirming out of a gap in the branches, something with long flat limbs or half-furled wings, dragging itself tore up the structure. It looked soft, like clay, and the branches left deep bloodless gouges in its flesh. I must have made a noise because Foxy stepped up beside me and grabbed my arm. "It's all right," she said. "No, it isn't." "Fine, it ain't, but I'm an old lady and you're supposed to be keeping my spirits up." I croaked a laugh. Anna looked back over her shoulder, which surprised me. She hadn't looked at me when she'd answered my questions before. The laughter didn't sit well in that place, and I was sorry I'd done it immediately, but at least it got me out from under the shadow of the nest. Nothing else made an imprint on my memory. Just the dark doorways and the tapping of the effigies and the bits of motion. Finally, we got where we were going. The street had curved around to reach what looked like a slanted stone wall in the hillside. Another dark opening yawned from it, but this one had double doors in it, standing open. Anna walked through them without a trace of fear, and Bongo followed her, and I realized that if I didn't hurry, an effigy was going to go next and I would be left following one's back into the dark. My stomach lurched, and I rushed through the doors. Despite the width of the doors, The corridor narrowed until I could have touched both sides with my outstretched arms. It was dim inside, but not completely dark. The lighting came from what looked like oil lamps in recessed niches. I wondered vaguely what kind of oil they were burning. Did they have kerosene in Hell Fairy Wales? How did it work? If you're thinking that I was focusing on something inconsequential in order to not think about what was happening, you are absolutely correct. Someone must get the oil and refill the lamps, whispered the little voice in the abyss. The corridor sloped downward underfoot. There were no stairs. It just went on and on and on. Sometimes we would pass another corridor that joined with ours, or a doorway gaping like an open mouth. I lost count of how many questionable oil lamps we passed, how many times my shadow swirled on the wall opposite the niches. And it was a long, long, long way. The only mercy was that there were no echoes. I expected echoes in a corridor like that, but my footsteps fell muffled, as if there was a softness to the stone. I heard the faint tap of Bongo's nails and Fox's heels clicking behind me, and that was all. Compared to what I could have heard echoing, the silence of the stone was very welcome. When Anna suddenly turned right and went into one of the other corridors, I almost stumbled. If Bongo hadn't been leading the way, I might have kept going, half hypnotized, until I ended up God knows where under the earth. But Bongo tugged on the leash and I jerked my head up, startled, and Foxy ran into my back. "Sorry," she muttered. I think she was probably in the same state I was. The corridor did not slope here, but it did curve from side to side like a snake. I no longer had any idea what direction we were facing, whether we'd come all the way around in a circle and passed underneath the sloping corridor, or if we were still going mostly in a straight line. What I did know was that the unrelieved stone of the walls began to change. First it was only a few small hatch marks around the edges of the niches. Then the hatch marks began to expand, overlapping and twisting until they became long carved lines that connected the niches together. They went straight lines. They would double back on themselves, break apart, then rejoin. We came to a doorway where the carved lines wrapped around the threshold, not quite touching it. Unlike the other openings, there was a door in this one. Anna opened it and gestured for Foxy and Bongo and me to go inside. The room was not large, smaller than Cotgrave's bedroom. It reminded me of a sauna, not because it was hot but because there were benches along both sides. They appeared to be carved out of the same stone as the walls. A niche stood at the far end with another of the oil lamps in it. I looked at Foxy. Foxy shrugged. I clicked my tongue at Bongo and walked forward. "We will return," said Anna, standing in the doorway. Her voice was even more remote than it had been. It might have been a recording for all the warmth in it. "We must discuss your fate. You will wait here." Foxy looked at our cell, then back at Anna. "Doesn't look like we've got a lot of choice, do we?" Anna inclined her head. Under her elbow, I saw one of the humped, headless effigies moving back and forth. Foxy stepped inside. Anna nodded and closed the door. 19. We looked at the door. We looked at each other. We looked at the door again. Bongo sat down on the floor. "What am I gonna do if he has to pee?" I muttered. "There's a grate," said Foxy. There was indeed a grate on the floor beneath the niche. It had metal bars. Foxy and I stared at it. "Think you could fit through?" she asked. I eyed it dubiously. "Not unless they leave us here long enough to lose some weight. And I don't know if dropping into the sewer would be an improvement. Do you think they even have sewers here? I guess even horror people got a shit. Those bone and wire things walking around probably don't. I dunno. What happens when they eat someone?" I grimaced. From her expression, Foxy wasn't too keen on the answer to that question herself. We abandoned the grate and sat down, backs against the wall. Bongo laid down on the floor between us. "Do you think it's the same stuff as that white stone?" I asked, poking the wall. Foxy gave me a look. "You got a what's-it on you?" "A what's-it?" "An X-ray spectrometer." Even Bongo looked up at that. "I don't know what that is," I admitted. "Do I have one on me?" "Seems unlikely." That's the thing we used over at the cement plant when I worked there to figure out if a batch went bad. You give me one of those, it'll tell you anything you want to know about these rocks. Well, if I trip over one, it'll let you know. Maybe we could ask Anna if we could borrow one. Foxy snorted. We sat in the room in silence for a minute. Finally, I said, "I'm scared shitless." "Yeah," said Foxy. She closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the wall. "Me too. I sort of expected to die," I said. This was an awkward thing to express, as if I was picking my way through the words like I'd picked my way through the hill with the twisted stones. Or hell, I don't know what else I expected. But not for there to be a place on the other side of everything, with people, and I shook my head. There's too much more of it. Like if you went out after, I dunno, after the Loch Ness Monster or something, and then it turned out that it was a secret government lab breeding plesiosaurs to blow up submarines. Foxy opened her eyes and tilted her head sideways, like Bongo did when I did something particularly baffling. Yeah, I'll have to explain that one a little better. I waved my hands helplessly. It's too big, there's too much there. I mean, if I say, there's weird stuff in the hills, everybody nods and says yup, doesn't surprise me, but then I say, and they've got a whole city back there made out of white rocks and bird nests and walking deer skulls and things made out of old shovels tied together, and then it sounds crazy. I groaned. Do you think this is what happens to people who get abducted by aliens? She raised an eyebrow. Most of those people are nuts, Hon. I know. But everybody's going to think we're nuts too, if we try to tell anybody about this. Foxy laughed. There wasn't much humor in it. I don't know that that's going to be a problem. I sighed. Yeah, I said. I know. I slid down on the floor and rubbed Bongo's ears. He thumped his tail. We sat there in the silent room for what felt like years. I suppose it was probably hours, although it might have been less. Bongo stretched out and went to sleep. Well, why not? Head had a long, exciting day full of running and climbing and scary things, and then somebody came along and enchanted him to make him feel better. I'd want a nap too. It was a lot for one elderly coonhound. It was a lot for one 30-something woman. The stone walls muffled sound. We didn't hear our captors approach until the door began to open. Bongo raised his head from his paws and gave a brief whine. It was Anna, flanked again by effigies. I couldn't make out which ones these were. The shadows were thick around them, and all I could see was the occasional gleam of wire. Anna spoke to them over her shoulder. I will tell the prisoners of their fate. They tapped and clicked at her. She stepped inside and shut the door behind her. Foxy and I stared at her. She stood before us, inhumanly tall, inhumanly pale, her eyes full of red gleams. Then she took 3 steps forward and sank down to her knees. You have to help me get out of here, hissed Anna. Please. Foxy said, what? This was maybe not the most intelligent response, but it summed up my thoughts pretty well. Please, said Anna in a low, urgent voice. Crouched on the floor, something seemed to change in her face. She was still pale, but not like a corpse, and her eyes were plain brown, no longer flecked with red. Was that some kind of illusion, a glamour, like they used to call spells back in the day? Or is this the illusion? Is she trying to look more human for us? They can't hear us in here, I don't think, not with the door closed, she said. At least, I don't think they can, but it's hard to tell. They don't react to things like we do. Are you in trouble? I asked, thinking that whatever trouble she was in, we were probably in much worse straits, and if anything, we should be asking her for help. She pushed her hair back from her eyes. Yes. It's bad. This isn't a good place. I noticed, I said. She gave a short, humorless laugh. You would have, I imagine. I don't even see it anymore. You get used to everything. Except sometimes the puppets do things that no one could get used to. The puppets, I asked, although I was pretty sure I already knew. The bone and stick things. She nodded. Uriah says they used to be shaped more like people. But he's been here too long. Much longer than me, and I've been here for years. I don't know how many years. I know it's been a long time. It was winter of 73. Foxy and I looked at each other over her head. Anna looked to be, at most, in her early 30s, and only if she'd been really relentless about skincare and exercise. It's been a while, said Foxy kindly. What happened to you? Wandered in here, did you? Ugh. Anna put her face in her hands. I was so stupid. We'd go out in the woods behind my cousin's place and smoke grass, try to raise our consciousness, and then one day a woman showed up while I was high and I actually asked her if she was my spirit guide. Can you imagine? Whatever I was expecting from the holler people, it wasn't this. Oh, I said. Foxy had no such qualms. Hell, hon, I was tripping balls one night and asked a cop if he was my daddy. It happens. Anna nodded. She was the one before me. She brought me back here. Then she left that bitch. You can't leave, I asked. Not for good. The poppets will let me go out for a bit, but they watch me. If I try to leave, she swallowed. Whatever she was going to say, she apparently thought better of it. They bring me back, she said. I pictured long twig fingers closing over my arms, a deerbone effigy picking me up and carrying me back to the place of stones, and shuddered. Something snapped suddenly into focus, now that she was no longer so tall and pale. Wait, I said. You were in the woods, I saw you, you're the hiker. Anna nodded. I've been watching you, she said, to see if you could help me. But you didn't look like. I waved my hands, trying to express tall and pale and red-eyed all at once. It's nothing, she said. She waved her hand and suddenly her eyes shone the color of brake lights. I recoiled and then they were brown again. A little magic. Like the charm on your dog. So that people don't have a freak out. Have a freak out, I thought. I can almost hear the 70s. I used to come out and see Frederick. She shook her head sadly. I don't think he understood what I was trying to tell him. He kept trying to warn me. I told him it was too late, but well, Frederick. She means Cotgrave. Oh. He mentioned a girl in the woods. I hadn't connected the hiker to Cotgrave's girl in the woods, but how could I? There were a lot of people in Ponsborough. It's not like you expect any of them to be magically concealing the fact that they are 7 feet tall and the color of ice. I think he was pretty far gone by the end, I said. Anna nodded. He couldn't help me, she said. You were the one who sent the note. And Drew Kilroy was here on it. She petted Bongo. Yes. He used to draw it. I didn't know if you knew him, but I thought you might recognize it. I tried not to sound accusing, but I'm pretty sure I failed. I came because of the note. Because you asked for help and instead you captured us and locked us up in here. Well, I didn't expect you to just walk in. I thought if you had found the place of stones, you must know something about how things worked. Foxy gave a short bark of laughter. No, I said. My dog wandered into it one day and then things started to go really sideways. Anna stopped petting Bongo and shoved her hair out of her eyes. You're not one of them, then. One of us. A what? Heart-hidden folk. They go out and get children on ordinary folk. My father was one. That's why they wanted me here. But you're not one, are you? I raised my eyebrows, thinking of my dad and the roughness in his lungs. Jesus, no. My dad's an actuary. I don't know why I added that last bit, except that it seemed like being an actuary was the diametric opposite of being a holler person. Anna looked as if she might scream. But you have to be. Frederick was one. What I said. He was one of us. Generations back, but there was a little bit there. How can't you have it? I blinked at her stupidly. He was my step-grandfather. Mine died in his 30s. Anna collapsed onto the stone bench. This is awful. I was getting a little fed up with her assumptions. It was looking like this was at least partly her fault. You could have asked or, not captured us. She shook her head. I tried to keep everyone else out but you. I thought you could help me. Foxy lifted her head. That's why it felt like the place was trying to keep me out. I tried, Anna repeated, sounding almost petulant. Once you were in the place of stones, the puppets were going to bring you back no matter what. I had to make it look good. They are already suspicious of me. At least, I think they are. Who knows what goes on in their heads? Don't you? Asked Foxy mildly. Anna gave a high, humorless laugh that made the hair rise on the back of my neck. Bongo jumped. I slid down on the floor and hugged my dog, feeling a territorial urge to claim him as mine, not hers. The hickory beads around my neck got tangled up in his collar, and as I wrapped my fingers around them to pull them loose, I had a strange sense of double vision. Anna, still looking like a hippie, with human eyes and human skin, and then behind that, as if through a frosted glass, Anna with red eyes and skin whiter than any white woman on earth. Which one is real? I dropped the beads against my chest. The vision faded, even though the beads were still touching the back of my neck. Perhaps the hickory was only strong enough to show me the glamour if I was holding it tightly. Anna hunched up one shoulder in a shrug, unaware of any of this. Look, I need your help. I have to get out of here. It's been too long. I can't do what they want. It's not working. I used to at least get pregnant, but now that doesn't even work anymore. If she'd sounded like a grieving mother, I think I would have tried to say something sympathetic, but she didn't. She sounded irritated. And I know people are complicated and grieve in their own ways and all that, and maybe it wasn't even grief anymore, but that was one more strange thing going on. I'm not judging. This whole situation was beyond anything I understood. We'll help you get away if we can, I said, which was a stupid thing to say, given that we were locked in a stone cell and she had free run of the place. But there's Effie Poppets at the house too. If they come after you, won't they just come to the house? The house, maybe. Anna dipped her head. But if I can get far enough away, they'll give up. I'm sure they'll give up. They have to give up. I wasn't so sure, but I also wasn't going to argue with her. Her eyes were doing a very unsettling thing, where they flashed red, then remembered they were supposed to be brown, but then the red would start seeping through again. What about the others? I asked. The other Holler people. Won't they try to stop you if you leave? What? It occurred to me that she might not know what I meant by Holler people. The hidden people. Like you and the old man. Anna stared at me, then gave another high, unsettling laugh. There aren't any others, she said. He and I are the only ones left. There aren't any others, I repeated stupidly. What? How is that possible? You've got a whole city here. Even as I said it, I remembered how silent the city had been as we'd walked through it, how the only movement had been the effigies. At the time I'd thought that perhaps the others were sleeping or watching us from the windows. Perhaps the truth was that there was no one left to watch. But if that was true, then where were the effigies coming from? Somebody was building them. Was it Anna or the other man? Your eye now, there's an old-fashioned name. I wonder how long he's been in here. An old-fashioned name, like Ambrose, for that matter. Ambrose destroyed the White Stone, but there was another one here. Copgrave knew about the Holler people when he was in Wales, and the narrator in the Green Book talks about them, so there had to be more. Are there other cities? I asked. In other places. Anna gave me a startled, appraising look. I don't know, she said. Uriah said something about that once, but he rambles. Nobody ever comes from them, if there are. Something rattled against the door. Anna stiffened. She rose to her feet. It looked for a moment as if she stood in a light that no one could see, as her skin bleached whiter and whiter and her eyes grew strange. I'll come back, she whispered. The puppets will want to take you to the building next. I'll try to put them off, but if I can't be ready. The build. Later. She opened the door. A wall of bone and rags and twigs stood behind it, moving restlessly. Anna stepped outside, head held high. Your cooperation has been noted, she said. We will speak again. She shut the door behind her and was gone. Holy crap, said Foxy. This is getting weirder and weirder, I said. What do you think is going on? Not a damn clue, said Foxy. She jerked her chin toward the door. Not real keen on her. I feel bad for her, but something stinks. Yeah, I said. I wanted to feel bad for Anna, who was clearly a victim of something, but there was a wrongness to her that I couldn't put my finger on. It reminded me of the narrator of the Green Book. That same feeling that I knew I was supposed to pity them, but I mistrusted them instead. Well, Anna had hauled me into a situation I had no idea how to fix, and she hadn't apologized. She'd just seemed annoyed. I was probably justified in being a little annoyed myself. There was just something off. Off, I thought bitterly. Yes, you're surrounded by monsters, trapped underground, but something is off. And you're still brooding because you didn't think the narrator of the Green Book was likable enough. Bongo liked Anna, but that didn't mean much. She'd put a spell on him. And anyway, Bongo liked everyone except for the UPS guy, and maybe he'd like the UPS guy too if he could do magic. I wished I knew what it was that was nagging at me. Then I'd know if I should pay attention to the feeling or ignore it. Of course, how I was supposed to pick out a subtle wrongness when I was being held in a cell by stick effigies under an empty city that was somehow in the hills behind my dead grandmother's house? Yeah, no, we're way past subtlety. She isn't acting right, though. The way the narrator in the Green Book didn't act quite right. If you'd been held prisoner by effigies for decades, getting pregnant from a rock, how the hell would you act? But why did she care that I wasn't one of the Holler people if I was going to help her escape? What did it matter? Do you think there's really no other Holler people? Foxy shrugged. Didn't see any. Of course, that doesn't mean anything. And you're right that maybe there's none here, but there's some somewhere else. Maybe the effigies are getting made somewhere else. In another city. Cotgrave must have seen one in Wales and then ran across the sea and moved into a house with one in the backyard. There's irony for you. Maybe he didn't have a choice. Maybe he couldn't get away from them. Do you think this is a trap? I asked, my brain a whirl of thoughts. Cotgrave drawn to my grandmother, whom he clearly despised. Cotgrave drawn to the house, not leaving even once it became clear that the Holler people had found him. Cotgrave trapped, and now we were trapped. Foxy raised a carefully drawn eyebrow. If it's a trap, she already sprung it. She's got us in a jail cell. Why come in here and lie to us about it? I grunted. After a minute I said, if there's no Holler people, who the hell is making the effigies or the puppets or whatever she called them? Maybe that old guy, said Foxy. He looks like the sort who'd stick a wasp nest on a pig's body and call it a day. Uriah, I said. When was the last time you heard of somebody named Uriah? Sunday school, I think. He was a Hittite or a Levite or a Sodomite or whatever. She considered this. Well, maybe not a Sodomite. I'm not judging. I considered. Do you think he could have made all of them? If I was immortal and bored, I'd probably get up to a whole lot of mischief. You think he's immortal? I think that Anna girl sure as hell doesn't look like she was a teenager in '73. I sighed. What do you think she meant about getting pregnant? Foxy considered this. Sounded a bit like somebody wanted her to have kids, but she couldn't anymore. Said something similar when she caught us, didn't she? I have borne 7. 5 drew no breaths. Hell, Foxy said, if I was stuck here with nobody but that old Uriah guy and a bunch of walking twig monsters having babies, I'd want to get the hell out of Dodge myself. I snorted. This exactly echoed my thoughts, and she wasn't wrong, but still. Why trap us? Why call for help when we pretty clearly weren't competent to give it? No, it wasn't us. It was me. She tried to keep Foxy out, remember. Why were the effigies staring in my windows anyway? We didn't have enough information, and that was all there was to it. We sat in silence. Bongo went back to sleep. You still got those sandwiches? How can you possibly want to eat at a time like this? Look, being terrified makes me hungry. I dug in my pack and pulled out the Tupperware container. As soon as it was open, the smell of tuna and mayo hit me and I was suddenly ravenous. Told you, said Foxy smugly as I shoved down 2 sandwiches. 10 minutes later, I was so tired I started to wonder if the tuna salad had been drugged. Perfectly normal, said Foxy. Look, we ran like hell and then we got marched through the street scared out of our wits. The adrenaline's gotta wear off sometime. She stretched out on the stone bench, using her backpack as a pillow. Also, neither of us got much sleep last night. I groaned. It felt incredibly dumb and dangerous to fall asleep with monsters everywhere, but it wasn't like I was going to be able to chip my way out of the cell using the Tupperware container. I know you're right, I said. It just feels wrong. And Anna told us to be ready. It's easier to run away if you're well rested. And they didn't kill us on the spot when they found us, so that's got to be worth something. You think they've got something else planned? Hon, for all I know they're gonna eat us and are trying to find the recipe book. On that comforting thought, she closed her eyes and began to snore. I climbed down and curled up around Bongo. He was a bit puzzled but happy to be the little spoon. I put my face in his rough and smelled unwashed dog, which shouldn't have been a comforting smell, but at the moment I'd take what I could get. I wanted to panic. I could feel the panic all through my body, as if my skin were stretched over the top of it, but I couldn't. My dog needed me and I couldn't break down until he was safe, and that was all there was to it. 20. I must have slept for a few hours. Long enough for one of the clasps on Bongo's collar to imprint itself on my cheek anyway. I sat up because Foxy nudged me. Huh? Bongo whined. Foxy nudged me again with her foot, practically a kick. I started to protest, then saw her face. She wasn't looking at me. I turned my head very slowly. The door was open, and the doorway was full of effigies. I crab-walked backward on one hand and both feet, dragging Bongo with me. He didn't fight it. I felt the moment I hit the metal grate on the floor because my fingers separated and a bar slammed into the space between my ring and middle finger with all my weight behind it. It was excruciating. I barely noticed. The effigies stared at us, eyeless. They weren't moving. I could see one of the headless, humpbacked ones and the one with the mud-auber nests on its back. There were others behind it, but I couldn't make out where one ended and the next began. They filled the doorway and the hall, as far back as I could see, a river of sticks and stones and broken bone sticks and stones, and I twisted myself around like the twisted ones. My shoulder hit the wall behind me. I could feel the metal bars digging into the backs of my legs. Bongo put a paw in a gap and slipped, then recovered. And the effigies just stood there, watching. Their shadows painted the ceiling of the corridor, unmoving. Very far away, muffled by the strange stone, I heard tapping sounds. Maybe that's the ones in the back saying, "What's going on? I can't see." I shoved my hand in my mouth to muffle whatever came out next. Hysterical laughter or screaming, I had no idea. With my other arm, I dragged Bongo's head down against my chest as if he were a small child and I was trying to keep him from seeing something terrible. He let me do it. Dogs never let you do that. Dogs didn't belong here under the Vorish dome. People didn't either. I heard a click beside me. It wasn't a twig and bone click. It was the sound of a gun being cocked. Foxy, I didn't turn my head. I got 6 bullets, she said. Her voice was absolutely flat, and she wasn't talking to me. I doubt you're gonna let me reload, but the first 6 could be interesting. I tore my eyes away from the doorway and saw that she had a gun leveled in front of her. It looked gigantic, but that didn't mean anything, since any gun looked gigantic as far as I was concerned. I wanted to ask her a question, like, where the hell did that come from, or maybe why didn't you shoot somebody before we ended up in a prison cell, but it didn't really seem like the time. The effigies didn't move. They didn't retreat. They didn't advance. They didn't even seem to notice. None of them had eyes as I understood it. They had hollows and sockets and empty places full of darkness. I still couldn't shake the feeling that they were studying us. Fox's wrists were starting to shake with the strain of holding the pistol up, but she never moved. And then finally, minutes or hours later, I couldn't begin to tell you, the effigies began to leave. I saw the shadows ripple on the walls as they walked away. Some of them didn't even bother to turn around. They just reversed their limbs and began to move in the opposite direction. The corridor filled with tick-tick-tick noises. The mud-orber effigy tilted its head at me. Its head was a couple of sticks tied together with twine, not even solid, just a vague V-shape that might have been a muzzle and more mud-orber wasps coming out the back, all bundled together like a pan flute. It reached out with its forelimbs and pulled the door shut. Foxy exhaled all at once and let her arms drop. She did something arcane with the gun and put it back into her backpack. Foxy, where did that come from? My grandmama. She said if I was gonna date boys, I should always carry cab fare and a condom. That is not a condom, Foxy, and if any of 'em gave me trouble, I was to whip that piece out and show 'im that mine was bigger 'en his. I digested this for a moment. Interesting woman, your grandmother. Yeah, she was something else. Anyway, I've had it in my backpack the whole time. Why didn't you pull it out when we were on the hillside? She snorted. And how many of them do you expect me to shoot? I ain't Annie Oakley. I can't line up 10 of those things with one bullet. She frowned. I admit, I did think a bit about taking that Anna woman hostage on the spot, but when people are throwing uncanny shit around, I ain't inclined to return fire. Seemed pretty likely that I'd just get myself killed and then you and your puppet'd be here all alone. Figured it'd be better to keep it for the last resort. Bongo heard the word puppy and tugged his head out of my armpit, wagging his tail. I wish I had 1/10 of the emotional resilience of a dog. I exhaled slowly. Well, I guess they know you've got it now. I couldn't believe how prepared she was, particularly in contrast to how unprepared I was. You ever think about joining the FBI or the CIA or something, Foxy? I looked into it once, but apparently they want you to have finished high school. Shame. That's what the nice agent said. He was a sweet boy. Made me breakfast in the morning and everything. I examined my left hand. The webbing between my fingers had turned an angry red, and there was a jarring ache through my hand. I squeezed various bones and nothing made me scream in agony, so it probably wasn't broken. Not that I could have done a damn thing about it if it were. At least it was the left. I can type hunt and peck style with my right hand if I have to. You know, in case I had to do any copy editing while I was sitting in the Holler People's prison. It's interesting, said Foxy slowly. I looked up. They came here without any of the Holler people. Anna said there weren't any more, I said. Yeah, she said. I ain't saying she's a liar exactly, but she's been leaving some bits out. Well, we've had one 5-minute conversation, I said, determined to be fair if it killed me. Not that I think you're wrong. Yeah. She nodded. But if she's not telling them what to do, who told the things to come stare at us? I blinked. I hadn't thought of it. The first effigy, the deer skull one, had been staring in my window, and I'd come to think of it as just a thing they did. And why I said, what were they looking for? Foxy shrugged. And the building, I could practically hear the capital letter when Anna had said it. Foxy shrugged again. I put my arms around Bongo again and wondered if we'd ever get answers, or if finding out the truth was going to be even worse. What time do you think it is? I asked. How the hell should I know? She jerked her chin toward the door. Listen up. Something's going on out there. I listened. Even through the muffling silence of the door, I could faintly hear an angry raised voice and clacking sounds. It was coming closer. I wrapped my arms around Bongo. He quieted a little, but I could still hear the whine down in his chest at the bottom of every exhale. A final angry shout. A clatter of bone and metal. The door opened. Anna came through and shut it behind her. Her eyes were as red as tail lights. Get up, she said. What's going on? I gripped Bongo's collar tight. It's the Poppets. They're going to take you to the building. I swallowed. Why? To get a look at you, I suppose. They've been coming to the house, I snapped. Staring at me through the windows. Haven't they had a good enough look already? She shook her head, her hair whipping in frustration. Who knows why they do what they do? But I thought your people made them. I remembered the passages in the Green Book, the Lady Catsup making a puppet, the clay men that the narrator made. Surely they were the same things, or something like them. Anna gave a short, grinding laugh. What, I've never made one. That old guy, then, said Foxy. Uriah. Him, scorn dripped from Anna's voice. He can't do much more than stare and mumble. He's been here for centuries. One of the last of the real old bloods, for all the good it does him now. No, he's not making them. Then where do they come from? It doesn't matter, she whispered furiously. Listen to me, we have to go now. She looked over my head at Foxy. Afterward, we have to run, do you understand? The building's near the edge. And they always stay together for a little bit after, so there'll be fewer of them. After what I asked. She ignored me. It'll distract them, she said. Be ready. After what? Finally she glanced at me. Ugh, I don't have time, you'll see. Eventually I nodded. So did Foxy. We hear you, said Foxy grimly. Annie yanked the door open again. A corridor full of clicking shadows looked in at us. Far back, I could see Uriah, surrounded by made monsters. Anna never faltered. She lifted her chin, inhumanly tall and inhumanly pale, and walked forward. The puppets parted to let her pass. Well, said Foxy softly, rising to her feet, I guess if we don't want them to drag us, we'd better follow her. I expected to take the long corridor to the surface again, but we did not. Instead we turned and turned again, until I was thoroughly lost. These corridors were better lit, which was well, I don't know if that was good or not. There were oil lamps every few yards, the niches alternating between the left and right side. Each splash of light illuminated carvings that rippled and swirled on the opposite wall. Either the magic on Bongo was starting to wear off, or there were too many effigies around us, because he began to turn his head and look at them, his forehead wrinkling. I could see him trying to think. Normally he doesn't devote that much mental energy to anything that doesn't involve food. I was not having an easy time of it myself. It was light enough in the corridor that I could see them clearly. I don't know if that was more frightening than blurry, indistinct shapes in the dark or not. There also seemed to be more of them than before, or perhaps they were just walking more closely. That's it. They're moving like they have somewhere to be. The building. I tried to picture what it could be. Another of these grey stone boxes, a gigantic factory, turning out twig and skull creatures on an assembly line. Quit poking me, Foxy growled to something behind her. I ain't moving any faster in these heels. How are you not having a complete breakdown? I asked her. I heard myself laugh as I asked it, which I hadn't intended to do. Panic was starting to claw inside my chest, as if one of the effigies had crawled in there and was trying to carve their way out. That's a lovely mental image. And so helpful right now. Foxy snorted. Was in some protests back in the day and the cops came to bust it up. These days, if I ain't being tear-gassed, I figure I'm doing okay. Keep walking, Hon. She gave me a little shove in the back. I hadn't even realized that I was slowing down. Plus I took half a Valium earlier, she added. And you didn't share. Well, I figured one of us needed to be sober in case we needed to drive. Not a lot of cars around here, Foxy. She sniffed. There's a thing over there, got a muffler for a rib cage. Looks like somebody tried to make a Greyhound, then got bored halfway through. I don't think we can drive away on a muffler. Not by itself. But I mean, we get enough of these things together, we might be able to build a car out of spare parts. Did you ever see that old show, The A-Team? PFFF Hon, I saw it when it aired. There's that episode where they get locked in a barn and turn a tractor into a tank that shoots cabbages. I yield to nobody in my love of Mr. T, but that one might have been a tad unrealistic. She considered this. Although they lock us in with an arc welder and I might work something out. Listening to Fox's outrageous comments kept me walking. If Anna heard them, she gave no sign. Our procession slowed gradually until it seemed like we were moving at a crawl. I looked forward and saw that ahead of Annan, Uriah was walking very slowly, his hands on the backs of two effigies that flanked him. Somehow the sight of a human or something human enough willingly touching one of the things made my stomach churn. I turned to the carvings on the walls to keep from looking at Uriah's monsters. These carvings did not look like mere ornamentation. There were figures that looked human, very tall, always facing the viewer, with a great curved shape over their head. The sky a rainbow rendered in grey rock the Vorish dome. The next set of carvings had the same figures, with smaller ones at their feet, like children. They reminded me of Egyptian carvings, how the kids always looked like the adults, only half the size. We passed a half-dozen more carvings, all of them similar except that the human figures were doing different things with their hands. Maybe an art historian could have made sense of it. I had the feeling that there was a great deal of information there, if only I had the ability to decipher it. One had the figures holding a baby, which was actually proportioned more or less like a baby, which made me wonder if I'd been wrong about the small figures being children. Representation of a royal family, a ruling class, and the others were peasants. Had I discovered Holla people feudalism? One of them was definitely a burial. I remember that one clearly. The human figure was lying down, wrapped in some kind of shroud. Something stood at its head, like a human with a bird's head or maybe some kind of mask. The small figures covered their faces, backs bent as if in terrible grief. The one after that had only the small figures, no large ones. Children whose parents had died, a population with a dead king. The next carving had the small figures holding up a baby, and then it went back to the same sets as before: big figure, small figure, domed sky. You seeing these, Foxy? Yep. And kinda reminds me of that stuff in pyramids. Or the others. The big winged bulls. Assyrian. Don't you swear at me. We left the corridors through another door set in the hillside and stepped into the dead city. It had grown dark. That surprised me somehow. I'd thought we were beyond day and night here. Nevertheless, the clouded sky had darkened to the color of cold liver. The air was cold. Lamps had been lit in the city, but strangely. I don't know why, but you expect streetlights to be regular. All at the same height, more or less evenly spaced. You expect it so much that you don't even think about it. You look up and notice immediately when a streetlight is out, because part of you knows that there is supposed to be a light right there. The lights were set up wrong. They looked like some kind of cloth lanterns, but they were tacked up haphazardly. One building would have 3 of them, and then there would be a long stretch of darkness. 2 would be at chest height, and the next dozen would be on the 2nd story. I'd say that it was unsettling, but I was a long way past unsettled. The Holla people were gone, Anna had said. Had the effigies done it? Did it have some esoteric significance, or had they just been given an order to put up lights from here to here without any innate understanding of how lights even worked? Isn't that interesting? Whispered the little voice. It didn't really matter anyway. The lantern cloth was torn and ragged, and most of them gave off only a dim, firefly glow. 1 or 2 blazed bright as day, casting shadows behind the effigies that were almost as grotesque as the creatures themselves. The panic was settling into a new phase. I felt distant and disassociated. I could hear all my thoughts coming from a long way off, echoing inside my head. For some reason I thought of Skip describing the difference between his ups and downs. Could something as simple as panic have an up and a down form? One panic had felt like I was going to run screaming into the city. This one felt like I might simply sit down and put my arms over my head and wait for an effigy to kill me. Probably it was nothing like that. I wasn't bipolar. What the hell did I know about it? One of the streets we passed down widened into a kind of courtyard with a carved stone in the center. It occurred to me, looking at it, that I had not seen anything like the carved stones since we entered the city. The one here was on a raised brick dais, as if it were a piece of sculpture. The effigies slowed as we entered this courtyard, filing around the stone in a circle. Anna put out a hand and we stood to one side, waiting. Tock, tock, tock. Tap, 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 tap. Click, click. They were making noises at the stone, turning their heads, I guess, those that had heads, moving bits of themselves back and forth. Are they worshipping it? I said. I sounded very calm. I was asking the question from very far away. Anna shrugged.